Hey Reflection, so this is going to be the second chapter and it's called Divide and Rule. And this chapter basically talks about the wars going on in the Middle East and what's actually going on and the true motives behind it. So this was actually a very interesting chapter. So we're going to go over all of that right now. And again, I underlined a lot in this chapter. The Mesopotamian region has been subject to much debate since the 1990s. The biblical sites of Iraq have been more than ever part of our daily landscape. For this land lies in the center of worldwide economic and political interests. Its incalculable wealth has become the object of master plan, and the war is only the darkest tip of the iceberg. The Gulf War of 1991 was the direct result of the Iran-Iraq conflict which raged between 1980 and 1999. 1980 and 1988. Sorry. Khomeini's Iraq presented a threat to the oil monarchs worldwide, and with the tacit approval of the UN, the dictator Saddam Hussein was left to do the dirty work. Let's see. Actively supported by the government of the USA, who secretly financed his arsenal under the pretext of giving agricultural aid. Howard Teacher, a member of the National Security Council, revealed under oath in 1995. Casey, the director of the CIA, personally directed this efforts to ensure Iraq's victory by providing it with sufficient weapons, ammunition, and vehicles. The United States gave their active support to Baghdad's war effort by granting the Iraqis billions of dollars in loans, transmitting information gathered by our services, finishing strategic advice, and keeping a close watch on the sale of weapons to Iraq by third parties. By the end of the 1980s, Saddam Hussein found himself under growing pressure due to the mounting debt to the U.S. government, which subsidized the last 8 years of warfare. His creditors suggested that he privatize part of his oil industry to finance the debt. No way. But the trap was closing in. Kuwait then received orders from above is in quotes, to flood the market with low-price oil, despite agreements signed in conjunction with the OPEC. Iraq and other members of the OPEC spared no diplomatic pains to make Kuwait back from its catastrophic oil policy, but nothing could be done. It was then that Saddam Hussein proclaimed annexation. And some of the stuff pages of the really important stuff I highlighted. The rest I just left out because it's not very key to talk about it. But if you buy the book, you'll get all the information. So I'm just reading parts of it. Of Kuwait, and sent troops into the country to control its oil fields. He never thought for a minute that his Western sponsors would turn against him, all the less as in July 1990 the American ambassador to Iraq, April Glaspie, had assured Hussein that the United States would take no sides in the conflict between Iraq and Kuwait. The policy was confirmed when Iraq notified the American Secretary of State from the forthcoming invasion and was told that this was a problem between Arabs, not ours. Work it out amongst yourselves. Iraq's mistake was not the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. America's unflagging support of the colonial state of Israel proves this, but its many resources, one of which poses problems to the interests of the powers that be, especially the occult planetary government. And in this chapter, he's going to talk about the occult planetary government a lot. Today we are being told the war on terrorism is the sole reason of the military intervention in Iraq, but this is not the whole truth by a long shot. We are also being led to believe that oil is the only interest for the military action against Iraq, but this is not quite the truth. According to the reports written by Donald Lussman, professor of economics in the University of National Defense, Washington, D.C., published in August 1st, 2001, oil is far from being a national priority for the USA. This topic will be discussed in further detail. Be that it may, the stakes involved in the Persian Gulf were high enough to warrant sacrificing thousands of lives to the ruthless war machine that already got underway in 1991. In those glorious days, the coalition of nations would still boast about conducting a clean war with surgical strikes and no losses. Is God not always on the side of the just? However, the loss of the Iraqi side was horrendous, not to mention the 300 tons of impoverished uranium in ordnance that was unleashed on civilians who had the misfortunes of living in a war zone. Radioactive contamination caused many cases of cancer, leukemia, and genetic malformation. The dispersion of this radioactivity will continue to contaminate the ecosystem for millennia to come. Not only that, but many of the 537,000 American troops involved in operations between January and February 1991 contracted leukemia, Parkinson's disease, and respiratory problems. According to the archaeologist McGuire Gibson, the territory of Iraq officially numbers about 10,000 archaeological sites, only 15% of which have been explored in any detail until now. The potential of 15,000 other sites have never been touched. This did not prevent the New World Order from undertaking a clean sweep of the past. It is estimated that thousands of archaeological sites in the southern part of Iraq have been razed amid a general climate of indifference, a major disaster for archaeology and for the world's cultural heritage. Tons of biblical vestiges have been reduced to dust and lost forever in the name of questionable peace. Among the official monuments that were destroyed was the stepped pyramid of Ur, which has been hit by 4,400 projectiles. Really? Was that necessary? Like, that's crazy. And the ruins of the Temple of Ctesiphon, which is considerably damaged by bombs. In the aftermath of the First Gulf War, Iraq was forced to its knees by pacifying powers and an age-old tactic reminiscent of the international isolation and retributions to which Germany was subjected at the First World War. Now, let's see. I'm going to go over all of that and go to... According to reports published by Le Monde Diplomatique in August 2002, the embargo and resolution Oil for Food 986 voted by the UN were responsible for the deaths of more than 400,000 Iraqi children. 560,000 according to the FO. Jesus. That's... I mean, I figured that much. These figures are scandalous, but no one seems to care. What are a few 100,000 lives next to a high aims of the axis of good? Another French newspaper, L'Autre, July 12, 2000, reported that because of the sanctions implemented by the UN, water purification facilities and plumbing were not to be replaced, owing the risk that the material could be used in the fabrication of weapons of mass destruction. In light of the information we have now, it is easy to see that these fears were deliberately exaggerated. The First Gulf War provided an opportunity for the wholesale looting of archaeological sites and museums. Some 4,000 objects were stolen from prominent museums such as the Mosul, Kirkuk, Karbala, and Basra. Karbala and Basra was supposedly the places where Imam Hussein and Prophet Muhammad had holy wars, apparently, and these were sites that were very sacred pre-Islam as well, which is really interesting. And it is said that the Iraq and the Irani governments are also destroying these sacred sites. All of these objects were inventoried in an official catalog. However, the strange story of the bronze statue stolen from the Museum of Kirkuk proves not all of these objects went into the hands of the greedy private collectors. Indeed, the figurine reappeared in 1999 among the collections of the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. Those dirty, dirty, dirty people. I'm telling you. You know, every single time I go into the Museum of Natural Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I always think, wow, all of this stuff has been looted. Like, seriously, all of the gold of the natives, I mean, they have a whole entire room dedicated to just gold alone of the natives. That's pretty despicable, if you ask me. The events of 9/11 plunged the USA into terror. It's also marked a major turning point for the biblical homeland that is Iraq. This is not the place to speculate on the mastermind and ordered attack, but the American President George W. Bush deliberate lumping of the so-called axis of evil: Iran, Iraq, North Korea. Let's see. I'm going to skip that. At the dawn of the millennia, the great world leader, George Bush, was able to lull the masses into fulfilling his mission to save humanity and guide it toward the clean world, and that's in quotation. The foes of the USA will be branded evil and equated to the opponents of the free and united world. What else? The American president's crusade takes on its full meaning when we realize that Iraq was the site of Genesis of the Bible. Oh, wow, okay. I mean, I read this before, but reading it again on Ormus, you really understand the vibration of the book, and I like Anton Parks because he starts off by saying he is a sentient being, and this guy knows his stuff. Alright, the Genesis of the Bible, the land of Abraham and the patriarchs, and even more importantly, of Adam and Eve. Very, very interesting. Let's see. I'm going to skip that. Let's see, what else? And they talk about they didn't find any weapons of mass destruction or chemical substances. This is really important, actually. Basically, the U.S. government, amongst the big lies served by the press and used by the U.S. government was a phony British report intended to prove that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, including lethal biological and chemical substances. As it happened, this so-called report turns out to be a compilation of information available on the internet and documents used 12 years before by a student to write his thesis. Many passages from the dissertation were quoted verbatim up to and including the typing errors. Oh my goodness. You'd think the governments would be smarter than to take a report and like have the typing errors. You'd think somebody was over there like looking at this stuff. Oh man, okay. In the wake of the American troops' entry into the Iraq capital, there was an unprecedented wave of looting at the Baghdad National Museum, with no effort being made by said troops to protect the archaeological treasures. In a matter of days, the museums of Mosul, Tikrit, and Babylon were also looted or burned, and many archaeological sites were plundered. British archaeologists could only deplore the loss of the precious national heritage and reproach the British and American forces for their unwillingness to protect the museums. And this, by law, is actually illegal, because you are supposed to, and it says this also later in the chapter, that by law they are supposed to protect anything of antiquity and of humanity, basically, because it is our right to have these things protected, especially when it comes to war, which the U.S. did not. It was the U.S. and I think the British, England, that did not sign this when this was being passed. Let's see what else. Okay. On the other hand, no time was lost in securing the oil wells. By the outbreak of the conflict, American firms had already been awarded juicy contracts for the reconstruction of Iraq. The National Museum in Baghdad had a collection of over 200,000 art objects that had been found in the most part of in Mesopotamia, the cradle of the great civilization of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. We may never know how many objects disappeared from the looters. For the looters took care to destroy the card catalogs in the process. That's crazy, man. That's absolutely nuts. This seems like a this is very carefully planned. It is estimated that 170,000 objects were stolen and the remainder considerably damaged. Let's see. Okay. Elizabeth Stone, who participated in an expedition organized by the National Geographic Society, confirmed that the looting was motivated by the desire to acquire these objects in the Western countries by well-to-do persons in the United States, Europe, and Japan. Of course! Of course! That's kind of how it is. Alright. The market for antiquities in London is presently flooded with cuneiform inscriptions on clay and terracotta tablets that sell for only 600 to 700 euro a piece. That's actually really sad that they would monetize off of our history for private collections. The international community did not fail to point an accusing finger at President Bush for his tacit acceptance of looting in the land that housed the oldest remains of human civilization in the world. An article of Hague... Oh, this is when I talked about the article of Hague Convention. I didn't know what the actual article was. And the protection of public property in case of armed conflict stipulates the occupying country and its army must take the measures necessary to protect cultural property that may be exposed or damaged by military operations in the occupied territory. And the U.S. and the United Kingdom were among the few countries that did not sign. I knew it was the U.S. and the United Kingdom, but I didn't know what the article was called. Let's see. April 17th, 2003 declared, the archaeologists and scholars worldwide did not hesitate to accuse American collectors for their behind-the-scenes role of the spoliation of the Iraqi museums. A group of UNESCO experts that met in Paris on Thursday, April 17, 2003, declared that the looting of the archaeological treasures was the work of extremely well-organized team who even had the keys to museum safes and vaults. In a declaration made to the French news agency AFP, Donny George, Director of Research and Studies at the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad, pointed out that the looters ignored replicas of the objects and stole only the originals. Like, how would you know that if you weren't an art expert? Like, I went to art school and even I wouldn't really know because I don't have the knowledge in knowing or, you know, discerning from fakes. Like, these had to be people that were either in the industry or had a lot of knowledge about this. Let's see what else. They declared that the Guardian, they're talking about right now, They declared before the outbreak of hostilities, an organization founded in 1994, the American Council of Cultural Policy, negotiated with the American State Department and Department of Defense to obtain relaxing of the legislation process for protecting the Iraqi cultural heritage. So before they went into war, they relaxed the policies, basically. Wow. In 2002, the weekly art newspaper ran an article titled Iraq's History is Our History Too. In it, we can read the ACCP offers the assistance to future Iraq institutions in order to conduct excavations more efficiently by means of advanced technology. The subheading of this article is very well telling. Collectors, curators, lawyers, and art patrons are urging the U.S. government to take historic sites in Iraq into account as the military map out possible scenarios for attack and occupation. What else? Why decide to invade Iraq when no weapons of mass destruction was found? Who orchestrated the subsequent looting of national museums and archaeological sites of Iraq? Were oil wells and spoils of the only objectives of a few oil companies and dubious organizations covered up by the Bush administration? Nope. And this is when it's about to get really weird. He's going to talk about stargates and stuff like that in the next chapter, which is going to be really interesting. We now know that the oil from Iraq benefits the American oil companies, but that is not the sole or even the main reason. Resources to military force in the reign of the Persian Gulf. It must be said that oil is and will remain to be the formidable political weapon of means for blackmail. This is just another way to control the energy supply of any country that might venture too independently from the American giant. Let's see, what else? The events linked to the imperialist offensive in Iraq led to a wave of resignations in the member countries of the coalition, a sign that diplomacy on our planet is in great danger. The American government's inability to establish a peace plan for Iraq exposes the country for chronic insecurity and implies that peace was apparently not part of the original plan. Can peace really be one of the objectives when we know that it would take only $15 billion to effectively reduce famine in our planet, and that according to Stockholm Peace Research, the exportation of weapons earned $101 billion for American companies in the year 2002 alone. Not only that, but the military budget of the United States has increased by $370 billion in 2002 to $383 billion in 2003. This money has been used to produce high-tech weapon systems and ensure the deployment of infamous American anti-missile shields. In light of these facts, the other revelations to follow, I must conclude that history on our planet is an eternal return of ever the same, and that the stakes in Iraq involve more than just oil. As you will see, the control of Iraq, psychologically speaking, was the capital importance of the occult government on this planet, and closely linked to the military project, whose purpose was no less than the subject of the entire Earth to control it. This is the notorious Star Wars project of President Ronald Reagan, and he's going to go into the Star Wars project in the next chapter. I'm going to be leaving out a lot of the sources and the footnotes because they're very important, but it kind of gives away a lot, and I'm going to leave that for you guys to, you know, dive into when you get the book. Anyway, we're going to go to chapter 3, but this video is getting kind of long, so I hope this helps. I've been reading a lot, so I'm kind of tired and loopy, and I've also been moon gazing and meditating for the rise of consciousness for humanity with another reflection. Anyway, reflections, I hope this helps, and I hope you guys are having an awesome, awesome, awesome day. Bye, reflections.